Sig is marketing the new P211 GT5 as a duty pistol. I think they're underselling it. After running it next to the P211 GTO and a $6,000 Atlas Athena, this thing is quietly one of the best competition guns under $2,500. And I'll show you the scores to prove it. It also comes apart on me at about 500 rounds. Both of those things are true, so let me explain. So a quick disclosure, this gun did lay down on me. I'm gonna give you a list of 4 things I think can be improved on this pistol, but Sig Sauer did send this pistol in for video. That doesn't color the commentary any. I just have to show you the reality of what it's like messing with this gun, including when it doesn't go as planned. We're gonna do that a couple ways. We're going to go over the design of the gun and why it shoots as brilliantly as it does, and it does shoot brilliantly. We'll then chat about whether the gun actually makes sense as a duty gun or is it just tactical badging on a competition gun. And I'll show you how the gun holds up against the P211 GTO and the Atlas Athena. We'll go over the strength of the gun's modularity, 4 things on the gun that could be improved, and then my overall thoughts. So initial impressions of this gun are that the gun shoots absolutely brilliantly. It weighs a metric boatload at about 43.5 ounces, which is similar to a CZ Shadow 2, which is about a pound or more than what you would probably think of for a duty gun. But unlike the Shadow 2, the P211 GT5 is properly balanced. If I take my fingers off, it barely tilts forward in how the gun sits up in the hand. Most of the weight is kind of neutral over the trigger guard, whereas like CZs are like super muzzle heavy. And that extra weight does help kind of keep the gun planted when you're trying to go fast or when you're trying to slow down and aim. And the gun absolutely has the accuracy to support hitting with it. These are the good results I got from the 25-yard line with a rest. The gun is built on 9mm geometry, which means it's not built on 45 ACP geometry like all of the 9mm 2011s are, which means that the grip is smaller and everything like the trigger and the mag catch is going to be a little bit closer to your hand because the grips don't have to be quite so long front to back. So the end result is a gun that is more comfortable in hand and the controls are going to be more reachable by most people. As far as those 9mm magazines, they are P320 mags. It comes with a 17 rounder with a base pad that I haven't seen on a P320 mag before, and 2 of kind of the classic 21 rounders. The geometry and design of the grip is actually very good. There is a great relief under the trigger guard. There's a slight bump at the front of the trigger guard to kind of lock in with both hands. The traction that comes on the pistol is excellent. Now this is a modular frame gun, meaning that this is the subframe, this is the grip that is bolted on, and these grips are then bolted onto the grip. There's an exhibit meme in there. And I wish more gun makers would copy Sig's HMARK on this, because the top part of the grip, which is the most important part of the grip for battling rotation of the gun when the slide is all the way open, they actually checkered the grip right there to provide traction so that your support hand can resist the turning moment of the gun. A lot of gun makers will just leave that area of the grip smooth, and they're leaving performance on the table, in my opinion. The magwell is massive. One of the best magwells on any gun in this category for kind of that tactical size magwell. So skinny Sig mags, big magwell, it's like throwing a hot dog down a hallway. You've got room for error. The controls on the gun are fully ambi. There is a safety on the right side of the pistol. There's a slide lock on the right side of the pistol, and you can swap the mag catch to be accessible on the right side of the pistol. The slide has a nice kind of tri-top cut that makes manipulations at the front of the gun super achievable. It's actually kind of a nice profile for a slide. The serrations are super usable. And some of y'all are gonna ask, is the reverse plug still plastic? Because there's that one dude who kicked up drama on YouTube because he broke his. I put 3,000 rounds through my GTO with the plastic reverse plug and didn't have any issues. I suspect that there may have been an installation issue when he put it back together, but no, the reverse plug is now metal, so that's not even on the table. Another thing that the Sig is doing, along with all of kind of the more modern designs on single action only guns, is it has an external extractor, which sounds like, hey, we've been doing that on striker guns for years, and you'd be absolutely correct, but for some reason, the single action guys are holding on to tradition and using the internal ones. But the Kimber 2K11, the Staccato HD all feature external extractors, and this gun does too, so the gun can be more reliable. So a lot of good design choices were made by the people designing the product over at Sig. It's like they actually listen to what shooters want and then just kind of put it on a pistol, where some other brands are just like, we've made a gun, you can buy it. And so I do appreciate all of the fine details that went into the design. And performance shooting is performance shooting, whether it's in a competition holster or a duty holster, and there's no questions. The gun is absolutely a bullet hose. But it does beg the question is this gun really set up for duty? I'm not a law enforcement guy, but I shoot with a bunch of them, so let's kind of dive into it. So what actually makes a gun a duty gun? It has to be super duper reliable, and it has to stand up to neglect and abuse for people not maintaining their firearms. It needs to be inexpensive. It needs to be easily maintained at the armorer level. If you have a fleet of thousands of guns, somebody having to get out all the punches and all the Torx bits to get the gun apart to service it is going to take more time than something like a Glock, where you have an Allen key or a punch or a ballpoint pen and you can take care of it. So out of the gate, I would argue that the form factor for this gun is a little bit too big to be a duty gun. A lot of cops are going to be sitting in their cruisers many hours a day, and with the full 5-inch muzzle in a duty holster on their strong side, it's going to be pushing into the bolster of the seat a whole lot. And then the gun weighs 43.5 ounces unloaded. Yeah, did I mention that? It's a heavy boy. Typically, duty guns are roughly 30 ounces or less in the holster, and this gun is heavy. If you kit it out with a light, that's another 4 ounces. So what was a 43.5 ounce gun is now roughly a 47.5 ounce gun. You throw in a magazine that weighs the better part of another ½ pound or so, and you have a properly heavy boat anchor hanging off your waist. And the gun's not cheap either. It's currently selling for about $2,100, so it's super expensive. I'm sure Sig has some kind of like a hero program or something like that where the gun is sold to police departments for a lower price, but even still, it's gonna be more than a polymer pistol. The gun needs to stand up to abuse and neglect. So remember the video I told you about doing 3,000 rounds on the GTO? I oiled that one extra time. It came out of the box oiled, I shot it a bunch, and I oiled it one time at about 1,500 rounds and carried it all the way through to 3,000. So the guns do stand up to abuse and neglect pretty well, so that's to the good. Maintenance is going to be another thing. You can see that the back of the gun has a hole there. That's because the firing pin is retained by a roll pin. It's not a firing pin stop where the firing pin just comes out the back like a proper 2011. You're going to have your Torx bits to get the grips panels off if you have to service kind of any of the clockwork inside the gun. Taking the gun apart, period, for field stripping is more involved because Sig gives you this tiny little punch, and if you lose that punch, then taking the gun apart becomes a lot more difficult, but you have to put the punch in through the right side of the slide stop, and it's just difficult to get apart. So maintenance on it isn't as easy as some of the polymer striker guns you're going to find out there. And one thing a lot of people say is that single action guns are not suitable for duty because all of the classic 1911, 2011 ones, like the old, P series staccatos before the HD series, if they took muzzle down drops on pavement, then the firing pin would go down and make contact with the primer through inertia. This has a Series 80 trigger with a firing pin block, so inertia firing is not a thing on this pistol. That Series 80 trigger is actually quite good. You don't really notice it at all unless you're bench resting it for group shooting, because you can kind of feel the firing pin. At that last little bit of take up, there's a little bit of creep, and that's what's disabling the firing pin block. And you would never notice that at all when you're just shooting on a line, shooting drills and stuff like that. Like, it's actually a pretty good trigger. So is it a duty gun? I would say probably certainly not the GT5. Maybe the GT4 gets away with it. That shorter muzzle, I think, would go a long way towards comfort in the cruisers. And I think you would keep all of the performance, or most of it, from the 5-inch version of the gun. But the gun is so squared away that I think it absolutely would help people on their qualifications if they were to get up and shoot it in quals. Another thing that is required for a duty gun is that it can shoot super spicy ammo. So my buddy Danny was filming with me when we shot this gun. He is a prolific reloader and brought some of his crazy reloads. The first one we'll call Danny's PHRs, were 124 grain jacketed hollow points loaded to 1250 foot per second. You know that the federal HST 124 plus Ps that are loaded to 1200 per second, yeah, it's more than that. Danny's pissing hot hand loads with the Porky GT5.
Even better, dude.
Really?
Oh, there's no comparison. 5 shots.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, dude, you want to run this thing with hot ammo for sure.
That's like a 155 power factor load right there.
That felt great.
It felt like nothing.
It feels like it didn't even lift as much.
Yeah.
So USPSA guys, that's power factor like 155 ammo, and the gun shoots it better than it shoots range ammo. Not that it does a bad job with range ammo, but holy cow, can the thing lay it down with the heavy stuff. Danny also had his 9mm 95 grain loaded to 1400 foot per second that he used in his ported and comped guns, and the gun shot that no problem as well. All right, 95 grainers.
It's definitely jumpy.
Yeah. The ledges really help though. Dude, that's good. I like it with the spicier ammo, like a lot more. And obviously it ate a boatload of Buffalo Creek 124 range loads. Buffalo Creek ammo helps keep the guns fed on the channel, so a shout out to Buffalo Creek. So let's take a look at how the gun shot next to the P211 GTO and the Atlas Gunworks Athena. The GTO is the older brother of this gun, selling for about $300 more, and the Athena is a high-end gun that costs more than both of the GT guns combined. So Danny shot these with me, so we have a couple of data points as far as how the guns performed. For the close range stuff, the 7-yard bill drills, the guns all ran at basically the same speed. Our ability to get hits was ultimately the differentiator. Danny had nearly the same speeds from the Atlas and the GT5 with the same hits, and he was actually slower with the GTO, which is not what you'd expect to find. Danny mostly shoots his competition pistol when he's shooting, so he's used to kind of how one style of gun moves. So like shooting multiple guns in the same session, trying to do performance shooting. The guns move differently, it takes really getting used to. Meanwhile, I got more performance from the GTO, making 4 of the rounds almost touch and 2 were still in the A zone. The Athena hooked up with a little bit better accuracy and a good time, so actually the GT5 at the 7-yard line performed the worst for me, and it's got kind of the biggest, heaviest slide compared to the other 2 guns. If you care about USPSA hit factors, these are them on the screen in front of you. At the 25-yard lines, all of the times were largely the same, and again, it came down to hits. I actually had my best accuracy at the 25-yard line with the Athena, although it was slower based on how the gun was returning. Whereas Danny shot the best at the 25-yard line with the GT5, then the Athena, then the GTO. Again, here is the finish on the guns using USPSA hit factor. So a lot of those mid-tier 2011s are like $3,000 to $4,000, and this is about half of that. So while it's expensive to like a pistol, it's like 3 Glocks, nearly 3.5 Glocks. It's still a pretty good bargain, and if you consider the modularity of the gun, it actually gets a lot more of a value. So the reason I shot that Atlas gun is because it has what a lot of people consider the best grip in the 2011 game. Their Alpha grip, which allows swapping out palm swells, and you can see on my gun, I've got a large palm swell on the right side, and then a palm swell ledge on the left side. I forget what they call that thing. But that makes the gun a little bit fatter in certain areas, which spreads out the recoil in the hand and gives my support hand more to get behind when I'm shooting the gun. And this gun does the same thing for a fraction of the cost because it has these grip panels. These are the LOK Grips APS TAK, that stands for angled palm swell. So you can see that the back of the grip is a little bit fatter. You can't really feel it, but it stays skinny at the front of the gun where your fingers sort of interface with the pistol, but it gives you a nice ledge to get behind on the pistol so you can lock in with your support hand, and it makes an appreciable difference. But these kind of grips are like $130 or so, whereas that Alpha grip, if you were to buy that Alpha grip to put on your staccato, is about $1,000, including the small parts that go on it. Yeah, it's a very, very expensive grip. And they make like brass versions of the grips as well. So if you put brass on there, it makes the gun about 5 ounces heavier. So now your 43.5 pistol is pushing about 50 ounces. Here you can see the guns moving in slow motion. It's not wildly different, but I can tell you like how the gun feels in hands. It just feels more stable as you're shooting the brass grips.
There it goes.
That thing is
bonkers.
Absolutely ridiculously stable.
That is nice.
So that extra modularity that they've provided, it basically means that you're not going to need to swap out grips on the P211. You've got the grip panels, which can do that for you. And 2011 grips are super expensive. For the nice ones, they're like $400 to $600 typically. And sometimes it requires fitting, whereas it takes about 30 minutes to swap a 2011 grip. It takes about 2 minutes to just swap out these grip panels. So a super, super nice feature to have. All right, so the gun's not perfect. So let's go over a list of 4 things on how the gun could be improved. The first and most obvious is we were shooting guns about 500 rounds in. The magwell kind of popped off because the screw that retains the magwell had walked out. So something happened with the magwell. It kind of popped off.
We'll have to get it fixed.
That's not that huge a deal. We got a torque spit out and torqued it back down, and the gun was fine, and it has been fine ever since. But, you know, that shouldn't happen. So maybe Loctite that screw from the factory so it doesn't walk. That's one. Number two is a maintenance thing for the fellas who obsessively clean their guns. Remember that little punch I just showed you? If you don't have that little punch, taking the gun apart is a lot harder. At that point, you could reach in the slide with a tool and push out on the slide stop, but it's a lot more difficult than just using that little baby punch and going in from the side. So don't lose that punch is what I'm saying to you. Maintenance is not as easy as it could be on this thing. Whereas the Staccato HD, which has the similar setup there, you can actually kind of pull the slide to the rear and push on the elongated nub that projects through the right side of the slide stop, and you can actually push it out and then pull it out from the side. It's easier on the HD series of pistol than it is as Sig has designed it. Number three, the traction on the back strap and the front strap is not what it could be. Now, they've got the nubs approximately the right size, but the nubs have been kind of like dumbed down so they don't bite as hard into the front and back of the gun. If they had that extra little bit of bite there, I think that the gun would just be super, super nice. Now, I realize that a lot of you guys who have computer hands out there are probably going to think it's just fine, and it is just fine for most people, but for dudes, you know, manipulating guns a lot who get like leathery palms, it's just not quite enough. And finally, because of how they designed the magwell for this gun, you can't really use flush mount 17 round magazines, which people who've had P320s probably have a bunch of those. They don't really work in this gun unless you change the base plates. And when you do that, you're gonna have to go to those bumper pads like comes on the 17 rounder that comes with the gun, because if you even use like the Legion base pads that came on the P320 Legions, the mags seat below flush, which isn't ideal because you can't get at them to rip them out if the magazine binds. And if it's below flush, you may not seat the magazine fully when you're trying to go reload it. So it really is designed for like 21 round magazines that it comes with, or just very long magazines. So flush 17 rounders is going to be tougher to get in here, and the 21 rounders add into the length dimension, which is already a very tall gun. So how does the GT5 shake out in a super crowded field of single action only pistols? Well, if you send me a message, and I get sent this question probably 2 or 3 times a week for the past, I don't know how many years, but like I've got X budget, what is the best single action gun that I can get for that price point? And my answer is pretty common. There are basically 2 options. There was Bull Armory, and then Kimber with their 2K11 came out. Those 2 things are, in my opinion, like the best value for money. The GT5 is going to sit up there with those guns, and now you've got 3 choices at the price point you can go look at. The GTO is similarly a brilliant gun. It's just kind of limited on what its use case is since it is so heavy and has a compensator. For sport, it's going to be an open gun in USPSA unless you get the sight block, and in IDPA, it's too heavy to make work unless you swap the magwell to an aluminum one. But either way, I'd say the GT series of pistols at this point is pretty well squared away. And I realize I have not shot the GT4, but I'll go ahead and opine as to whether I'd want the GT4 or the GT5. I'd probably prefer the GT4 over the GT5 simply because this is a big heavy slide. It is a slow kind of recoil sensation. I like a faster, more responsive feeling slide. So I think I probably enjoy the 4-inch version of the gun a little bit more, but that doesn't really detract from what the GT5 is, which is an absolute beast. It is a fantastic shooting firearm. So I think that you're probably going to see a lot more GT pistols in holsters at pistol matches across the country. Whether they make it into duty holsters or not, that's up for the departments to decide, but I would say that these are some of the easiest shooting pistols that you can get your hands on. And so the GT5 is a workhorse, and it's earned its spot on my list of recommendations. Now go watch that 3,000 round video on the GTO.